Hello, my name is Joe Basili. Good afternoon and good evening for those of you in Europe and those of you on the West Coast rather that are joining early in the morning. Thanks for joining us for today's call. Today's presentation.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Joe Basili. Good afternoon and good evening to those of you in Europe that are joining us for today's call and those of you on the West Coast that are waking up early for today's webinar. Today's presentation is part of the Telecom Expense Management Industry Association, that's TEMIA, part of our ongoing webinar series that is focused on providing information to the marketplace. In particular, these webinars are really geared towards enterprises that are seeking to learn more about telecom expense management. We also welcome telecom solution providers, analysts, and attendees. So thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions during today's call, feel free to chat them in. I'll be monitoring the chat questions, and if it feels like it's appropriate to interject the question during the webinar, we'll do that, but we will have a question and answer period at the end of this webinar, and I would say try to stay on for those question and answer sessions because those are sometimes the most dynamic and interesting parts of the presentations. We'll be sending a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording of the presentation in the next 24 to 48 hours after this webinar, so look for that. And I should just have a little bit of a disclosure here. The views that are expressed in this presentation are meant to reflect the majority of our members, so I've kind of gone through the presentation and tried to vet it out, but at the same time, you have to understand that we do feature different member companies and different member companies' point of view. That is part of the dynamic, and I'm very happy to see that dynamic as part of the presentation. So with that, let's get started with the presentation itself. I should also just acknowledge the fact that our member companies, this is a list of some of the logos. We actually have some updates to do to this slide. We've had a couple new members join the association since this logo slide was presented, so I'm delighted to welcome new members. But these logos, these member companies have joined the association and they make these webinars possible. And just very quickly about the association, I've already indicated to you that our mission is to expand the size of the telecom expense management market globally. We look to help our members develop open industry standards to augment service quality and performance. And part of the dynamic of this association is that our members work together for the growth of the industry, but at the same time they're still competing for business. So they have this common vision and this common view that they can work together to help foster the industry. And in particular, you should look at that logo slide and look to do business with our member companies, because one of the things that they are doing is they are committing to a rigorous ethics code as well as the idea of open industry standards. And the fact that they've joined the association shows that they've got both the financial stability where they could pay the dues, but they also have the resources to be part of an industry trade association. And what I would say is most important is they've got the vision to invest in the future of the industry. So we've got a number of different programs within the association. We've got exclusives for our member companies as well as programs geared towards enterprises, which include these webinars. A number of the recordings are posted on our website. We also do research. We publish white papers. We conduct public relations. We've got committees that are taking a stand on issues that matter for both our members as well as enterprises. So I've already mentioned myself. I'm Managing Director for the Telecom Expense Management Industry Association, and I have the pleasure today of hosting this webinar with VCOM Solutions. And VCOM Solutions helps multi-site companies manage their telecom environment. VCOM offers a complete suite of cloud-based telecom management software tools complemented by a full portfolio of professional services. And they've celebrated recently their 10-year anniversary of providing customers with both savings and service in all 50 states here in the States. So I've got the pleasure of having Roger Top. He's the Director of Partner Development, as well as Joe Condi. He's the Executive Vice President of Sales, as well as the co-founder of VCOM Solutions. And just on a personal note, I'm delighted to have them. VCOM Solutions comes at the industry a little bit different than many other suppliers. So the topic that we're going to have today about this idea of free TEM software is a little bit different than some of the more central topics where they're more universally embraced by all of our different members. In fact, I would argue that a number of our member companies would have countering points of view, but part of the idea behind the association is we want to bring our members together and have all these different points of view and reflect that as best as we can as part of the association. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the mid-market. VCOM Solutions is going to talk about a sample client and kind of give us a feel for what that sample client looks like. They're going to identify some of the challenges of the mid-market. They'll talk about the idea of telecom lifecycle management as well as specific options for the mid-market enterprise. And then they'll go into a little bit about solutions, and we'll have some question and answer. As I said at the top of this webinar, please try to stay on for those questions and answers. This is really an opportunity for you to get an interesting insight, and some of that Q&A is often some of the most valuable piece of these webinars. And then throughout the webinar, we will have some polling questions. In fact, in the very first thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to open up the poll and give you just a polling question. Let's just get a sense, if we could, what the audience that we have today for today's conference, what your priority is. So in the next 12 months, if you would, hopefully you're seeing this slide, and if you would just select the radio button that most applies to you, would you say that you're in that world where you've been charged to reduce spending on network infrastructure and telecom services? Would you say that you're in that world of increasing spending on that? And just if you would, make your choices, and we'll then move forward. So please make a selection on this, and I see a couple selections are showing up here. Just a little bit more time. I see about 68% of you have voted. Are you in that camp of having to reduce your budget? Are you in the world where your budget has not been determined? Quite a few votes are in that world. Your budget has not been determined for telecommunications. Or are you in that world where you have to keep the same budget? And again, your individual response won't appear on screen, but we're going to show it and share it with everybody. So I'm going to close this out in just a second. If you would just select one of these radio buttons, that's great. Thank you very much. And I'm going to close it now. And let me go ahead and share then the results on this. And let's get a little bit of take now from Joe. And Roger, if you would, what do you think based on this, based on these results? Is this what you expected to see? We've got about almost half of the audience saying that their budget has not been determined, 43% there, 36 indicating that they, in fact, do need to reduce their spending on network infrastructure, about 7% in that world of increasing their spend. So there are companies that are growing or companies that are seeing the results of having a growing budget for communications, and then 14% keeping the same budget. So Roger, Joe, any comments on these results?
Yeah, I'll take that, Joe. I think it's great to see that companies are increasing their budget for the next year. But more often than not, we've seen that companies are having to reduce their budget. And I would imagine, based on the polling of the companies that don't have a budget, that would probably increase as well.
Great. So with that, why don't we go back into the presentation? Give me just a second, and let's get into a little bit about the mid-market and where you see it. So let me flip it over to you if we could.
Sure. All right,
And
well, thanks, Joe, for the introduction. I'd like to spend the first couple of minutes really talking about the mid-market, kind of giving you our definition of the mid-market, and also talking about a sample mid-market client. I would bet if I asked the question to 10 people on, how do you define the mid-market, I think I would get 10 different answers. We really believe that mid-market are companies who have annual revenues between 50 and 500 million. Their annual telecom spend ranges from 300,000 annually in the low end up to 3 million. We found that typically companies spend between 0.75% to 1% of their annual revenues on telecom. We're also seeing that many of these companies have multiple locations, and they're geographically dispersed throughout the country, and some even have an international presence. We've seen an increase in remote and mobile employees. I was just reading an Aberdeen article recently, and I read that the increase in remote and mobile employees is on the same rate as large cap companies with revenues over 1 billion. We've also discovered that many of these companies have similar technology needs of larger business peers. In many cases, they have even more sophisticated technology needs in order to compete against larger companies who have greater resources. So this is a sample mid-market client. I wouldn't say it's our average client. It's a good-sized client. This is a manufacturing company. They have 45 locations. They're primarily in the Northeast and South. They have 1,200 employees. Their annual revenues are 195 million, and their annual telecom spend is 1.2 million. As you can see, that's just under 1% of their annual revenue. They were previously managing 11 carriers and 82 invoices monthly. This company had no telecom lifecycle management strategy, so we believe they were a perfect fit for us. In terms of the next slide, I want to talk about some of the challenges that we see for the mid-market. I'm going to spend some time talking about what we've experienced with our customers and our prospects. Mainly, we're seeing a lack of internal resources and expertise. Organizations are stretched thin. The responsibility of managing telecom is often deprioritized. I mean, let's face it, it's not the sexiest thing to do. It's not the funnest thing to do to spend time auditing a bunch of telecom bills. So often it's pushed to the bottom of the pile. And many times when there is some resources, they really don't have the tools or expertise to manage this area. We've also seen that the decentralization of the telecom billing is becoming quite a problem. This is often caused by an inefficient and inadequate lack thereof of a clear and comprehensive sourcing strategy. I've seen many examples in visiting with clients where multiple people have the ability to order carrier services with no clear understanding of their inventory. This often creates more confusion when it comes time to manage that inventory and manage the billing of that inventory. We believe another area that needs improvement is in the manual processing of invoices and allocating these costs correctly. The lack of automation in this area is costly and often requires dedicated resources. And really, when you're doing this manually, it's very difficult to get any real granularity when assigning these costs. Most of the time, it's very high level. You're not seeing people, when they're doing it manually, being able to allocate costs back to a certain department or even to an employee or even doing some percentage-based allocation. We've also found that most companies have very little visibility into their cost structure, usage records, and contract information. Most reporting or business intelligence is non-existent or even very labor-intensive. We all know that there's billing errors out there from the carriers. We see them every day. They're very difficult to uncover, and even worse, the dispute process is arduous and painful at best. I've talked with many companies over the years that even question if it was worth it, considering the man hours involved. Another difficult area to manage is access to benchmark pricing and sourcing. Most companies don't have the resources to conduct annual audits. We're seeing that companies are doing an annual audit maybe every 2 to 3 years. We really believe that this is a lost opportunity because they could be missing out on an additional 5 to 15% reduction in their telecom spend. And everything's really more complex now. The distributed environments within companies, the consolidation you're seeing out there in the marketplace, all the new technologies that are hitting the marketplace. It's just much more difficult to go out and get multiple bids and price and source these carrier services. So just looking at the TEMIA poll that we conducted prior to this webinar, it's becoming more clear that companies want to implement a TEM strategy and telecom lifecycle management strategy, but many companies and IT departments are having to do more with less. We've also found that there's a greater need for education internally and how a TEM strategy can positively affect an organization and an IT department and ultimately impact the bottom line. Finally, many companies in the mid-market, while their overall spend is quite significant, they really lack any real aggregated buying power to drive any significant discounts. We had a client, for example, who their annual telecom spend was roughly $1 million, and they had no more than about 8% of spend with any one carrier. This was due to a number of issues. One, they were geographically dispersed, so there's some limitations in terms of what they can do from a bill consolidation standpoint. But more often than not, it's the fact that they had no clear and comprehensive sourcing strategy.
Great, and that brings us to another polling question. So let me go ahead and I'll launch that in just a second. What I'd like to do, let's see here. Hang on just a second. Let me just see whether we've got any other questions in here in the chat, and we don't. So, sorry. Okay. So let's get a little bit of insight into some of your top challenges, if we could, with this next question. We've heard a little bit from our speaker about some of the challenges in the mid-market. And for this one question, what we'd like to do is just get a sense of your top three. So if you would, select your top three. I see a bunch of you have already voted, and we've got a lot of votes coming into this idea of decentralized receipt of telecom bills, as well as lack of visibility into usage. Let's just, if you would, select three. The way the question's set up, unfortunately, I couldn't limit you to just three, so you're all on the honor system of just picking three choices here. About half of you have voted, so let's just get a couple more votes in here, and I'll close it out and share the results with you, and it'll give you a sense as to how you compare to your peers. So let's get a couple more votes, and I'll lock this thing down in a second. Okay, so let's share the results and get a little perspective from Roger and Joe in terms of what do you think of the results. So 92%, the majority of you indicate that in fact that your biggest challenge is lack of visibility into usage and cost data. We also see from this poll 69% indicate that it comes down to the top challenge is manual processing of invoices. So interesting. And then we have a three-way tie. I would not have predicted that between lack of budget or resources for TEM, decentralized receipt of telecom bills, and lack of benchmarking for pricing and sourcing. So what are your thoughts there?
This is Roger. I think it's really interesting that there are enough respondents in the lack of budget or resources for TEM, category, because it really indicates to me that at least a portion of the audience is thinking about or considering TEM as a process to put in place in the business. I just think that's a good indicator. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the number that sticks out to me obviously is the 92% lack of true visibility. And yeah, if you haven't implemented the TEM strategy, then you just really can't get those visibility from looking at the paper bills or CD bills. And you for sure can't get that visibility across multiple carriers in all of your inventory.
Mm-hmm. Joe, you can feel free to click through up to all the words on the page if you choose.
Sure.
So
Okay.
this is Roger Top, and I'm going to take the telecom lifecycle component of the presentation. And unfortunately, as I'm sure everybody is well aware, telecom and data services don't just show up at your company, and especially in the mid-market. The ability to pick up the phone or to have a secure internet connection is really a multi-stage process and is repeated every time for every service that you need to order and have. Many research firms and other experts have similar models to this TLM document. The way we look at it is this: we built the telecom lifecycle, and we break it into the 7 key areas of telecom lifecycle management. So I'll walk through just at a foundational level the components and how they really apply in the middle market. So sourcing, and Joe mentioned sourcing multiple times in the challenges to the mid-market, because it really is difficult for companies, and although a lot of the respondents to the poll question talked about lack of visibility and manual processing, we believe that part of that is caused at the sourcing level. So it's the foundation of any project, and really what we want you to do is be able to create carrier benchmarking for your existing services, then create a clear picture of applicable technologies. And sourcing is the right time to look at applying new technologies or shifts in services that you might need. The backbone needed for certain networks or security levels is a whole lot different from company to company. And from there, you need to be able to compare and negotiate pricing with multiple carriers for you to choose from and draw from. When procurement comes to play, you're really taking on the task of order placement, coordinating delivery of services, making sure that wires are run inside the building, and carriers are being managed in their scheduling, and the drive outs and the vans showing up with people plugging in services, and then the test and turn up so that you have continuity and delivery of your telco and data network. It involves a lot of people, usually from IT and facilities and purchasing and so on and so forth. Procurement is really in that same coordination part, the understanding of getting into the building. When you start to get into inventory management, and it hits a lot on the polling questions that were talked about earlier and some of the challenges, we like to say you can't manage what you can't see. And when you correctly source and you correctly procure your services, especially if you have a TLM strategy in place, you're going to get a centralized viewpoint and centralized ability to manage all the inventory so you can view it from every angle. Once you have services in place and you have your inventory, you have to be able to service them. And there's 2 sides of the service model. There's the internal and the external. So your internal is related to how you manage services being up and running, and how you process the need for one guy to switch from a building to another building. for a move, add, and change. And then the flip side is, how do you manage the carrier in relationship to delivering information to them and then tracking that information is coming back into your inventory management clearly. And the service in the organization is often the most misunderstood and kind of costly component that doesn't really get equated in the TLM lifecycle as much. People don't give it as much weight, but the reality is that a lot of the internal FTE costs are related to those MACD and technical changes that need to occur. Now, certainly per the question, or per the poll question, invoice management and accounting, the end-to-end flow of invoices touch so many parts of the organization, and most people, and we find, anecdotally, we find customers with every variable, and Joe used a sample client that fits kind of in the middle or on the high middle, but really if you range in the mid-market from a customer that's billing, 100-something grand a year to a few $million a year, they may sometimes look the same, which is actually quite a problem. They may have stacks of paper bills that come in, and one customer I love described how they chose to work on their invoice management and accounting part by how much the variable was for the stack of bills. If it was an inch up or an inch down, then they would take a look at it. But if it was the same size, they would just leave it alone. And that accounting part and the ability to allocate that in an automated fashion, we believe is integral to the TLM. But the reality is that most people don't have that in place because it's so difficult. And it's carrier-based, right? It's the fact that there's kind of an archaic billing system that delivers inconsistently across the board, but it also goes to the sourcing part about being able to procure and have electronic feeds and things into systems so you can build analytics and business intelligence, right? So at the end of the day, the only way to truly, as you go through the cycle, reduce costs and then manage proactively for cost-cutting measures is through being able to see data, splice and dice, and ability to report on it to metrics. So everybody in your organization, and I imagine this to be true, from finance and operations to IT, cares about it, although, like Joe said, it's not the most exciting and dynamic environment, but they care about understanding it at least at a big picture or as it applies to their department. We can switch slides, Joe. So the reality is, and this is in our findings, and this is also our personal opinion, which is that most companies, even ones outside of the mid-market, large enterprises, even some in the Fortune 1000, and many of our colleagues in TEMIA have this experience when they go to their typical client base, is that they have little or no strategy in place to address all the facets of the telecom lifecycle. And they've been piecing things together for years, creating, by default, overspending and overtaxing of internal resources that could be better used elsewhere in the organization. The way we want to break this down is status quo versus best in class, right? And best in class, borrowing from Aberdeen's recent report. But Webster says status quo is the way things are now, and best in class, defined by me and Joe, is organizations that are on the leading edge of managing the components of telecom lifecycle. So we're going to compare the gold standard to what essentially most people are doing. And there are plenty of companies, including some of you, that are doing it all, doing some of it now in the stages of best in class. But we're going to go through the nitty-gritty and kind of look at every part of the pie. And then, while we're discussing, I think you should think about how are you doing this today? What are areas for improvement? If I'm measuring against, that great category, how do I get it? And we're going to show you what the gold standard is and what we think that the middle market should be driving towards, and that we can help you get it. And even better, we believe that you should be able to get it for free, which is hopefully why a lot of people are here. So in sourcing, and we just kind of want to look at the benchmarking component of sourcing. So when you're selecting the right technology and creating aggregated buying power, those are really the pillars of sourcing. It's how you do it is the most important. So everybody's done it today, or there'd be no services in your office. But checking with a carrier rep or two, who's nice enough, or maybe has serviced your account for a long time, or a master agent, it seems like it's a good way to not a cohesive strategy around sourcing. And if the goal is to get the best information, the best pricing, and then the best technology deployed quickly and efficiently, the best-in-class approach is really going to take a carrier-agnostic view. And what that means to me is the ability for you to look at a service area and a service need and understand, forgetting your relationship with a specific carrier, what options are available in the region or building. How can you get carrier diversity into your network by getting the best pricing, the best service? Maybe some carriers they're buying, last mile and connections, and they're really the pass-through when you want a tier 1 carrier in that specific location. Getting that ability to look at multiple carriers for a location is key. On the technical design side, a lot of people are using third parties to supplement IT or have the expertise to do design, but sourcing really requires that discussion, and the best-in-class companies are relying on typically a third party to help them implement and design their technology structure so that they understand how they can upgrade or downgrade their needs. And when you look at even visible mid-market companies negotiating directly with a carrier, unfortunately what occurs is that there's not a lot of ability to look at strategic sourcing information across the board. So how do you know that benchmarked against X, Y, or Z company of similar size, are you there? As opposed to like the wireless and mobile world where there's a tremendous amount of, there's a discount applied to certain accounts that are attached to other companies. It's not as simple as flat discounts. You can switch, Joe. So once you've got the procurement, once you've got the sourcing in play, the way that we're seeing the best-in-class companies driving is really towards trying to get a single point of contact for the orders, getting through the whole component with project management, and really the standardizing. And what we're talking about with standardizing is having a clear process from getting services sourced and then delivered to the organization. And the way that people are doing it today is typically you're managing it all in-house, whereas if you use a best-in-class TLM, either strategy or exterior service provider, you're getting that support or you're getting that clarity because it's so quick. So in inventory management, once somebody comes to play through the procurement process, that inventory management is really reliant on the idea that you have a centralized and searchable way to view your information. Okay, so the goal here is that you have the ability to go from limited visibility to a cohesive viewpoint, and more importantly for cohesive viewpoint is, can your TLM strategy take your different services that are all named different things on every carrier bill, create a common language or term, and then give you every month clear recommendations for changes and optimization. In the service world, most people have trouble ticket management systems internally. They look for carrier responses to go through, or carrier recommendations when they're managing through the carrier. They're getting all the information from multiple carriers, and it's typically the most time-consuming in the service world. We think that you should be delivering to a single point those trouble tickets and those services so that you can see support, but not have to deal with multiple carriers at one time is really the key. So if you're getting carrier diversity, the downside is that now you have too many to manage. And on those lines, when invoices come in, and this is clearly an issue with the polling questions, how many people have buying power in the mid-market to get consolidated billing, right? Do they have the ability to get dispute management, like Joe mentioned too, that was quick and efficient and easy, and certainly was worthwhile for digging for information? If you manage those things internally, we see a lot of people who have kind of some approvals and they have some of these pieces in place for invoice management, but typically it's manually driven and is really drawing on resources quite a bit. When you have the sourcing and the buying power, typically you can get electronic invoices, which allows you at least some ability to manipulate the data more quickly. If you go with a consolidated billing model, seeing it all in one consolidated bill and then being able to break it back out is imperative. And especially for the accounting part of things, how many, and I think it's a good question to ask, how do you GL code or cost allocate things today? Are you able to see things by cost center or by location or by employee? And being able to, the best-in-class companies today, whether they're using someone or doing internally, are getting the information and passing it through in an automated fashion to the accounting platform, to the accounting group, so that they can do AP posting and filing. And of course, in analytics, we see a lot of good transitions here in analytics in companies where they want to see data in the financial side of the house, they want to see data in IT, they want to understand how they're going through the different stages and of changes relational to budget. So one thing related to the poll question, if you look at budgets, hey, we don't know what budgets are going. Well, the trending and analysis for your costs in telecom should be relatively fixed except for usage, right? You should understand your contracted rate. You should be able to understand what your kind of ongoing rates are going to be based on what you were contracted. And by using best-in-class practices, you get to shift away from losses that occur there. So when we approach mid-market clients, and we're going to talk a little bit about the options now, there are lots of options that you can do in the mid-market for telecom expense management and telecom lifecycle management that are outside of doing it internally. We've seen probably every variation under the sun when we approach customers, and they've all done them for the different reasons that seemed like the appropriate rollout at the time. One of the options is to take a standalone or licensed TEM software platform. And if you can, oh, Joe, you're going to do a polling question?
I'd like to, but it's up to you if you want to continue with the options.
Let's do that before we do the options. That's fine.
Okay. Okay, so let's we just have this polling question. Let's just see, we've kind of talked through what the issues are a little bit, but let's see, based on what you're hearing so far, what would you say are your top priorities? And if you would, again, just the honor system here, but select 3 out of this group of 5 choices. And I see a couple of you have already voted, which is great. The quicker we get through this vote, we can get through some of the other slides and get to some of the fun with the question and answer questions. So, and a couple of questions have already been chatted in, so I think it'll be very good discussion that we've got coming up. Okay, so about 63% of you have voted. I'll leave it open just for a couple seconds longer to get a couple more votes. Okay, and it looks like a couple of you have voted, so we'll close the poll out, and let me share the results with you.
Oh, wow.
And yes, you could see the results. So looks like inventory and asset management is where it's at.
It's a clear winner. I like that.
And build consolidation also, so quite a few people looking at build consolidation. And then just the idea of mobile and wireless costs are obviously coming into play. I'm actually surprised it didn't get more votes, but let me let Joe Condi and Roger Top, what do you think of these results?
Joe?
Yeah, well, I think the first one, the one that's 92% ranked the highest, improving the telecom asset and inventory management, as well as the bill consolidation. I think that's kind of the foundation of any telecom lifecycle management strategy, right? You got to start with having visibility into what your telecom inventory is and what you're spending, what you're spending your money on.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty clear indicator that visibility is key. So let's go through. We're going to kind of finish off with options and the solution that we believe the market is moving towards. Okay, so like I mentioned, we've come across every variable and every version of what people have tried to put in place, and some fits and some doesn't. Just depends on the outline. And I just want to throw out some of the ideas or some of the things that we've seen. So licensing a standalone TEM software that's server side, the ability to manage it and make changes on your own is certainly an option for the mid-market. Oftentimes, companies are being driven towards SaaS-based TEM solutions because they're a little bit lower cost of entry or lower barrier of entry as far as upfront costs. Those two also still require the majority of invoices to become coming electronically, which may or may not happen based on size and the ability to source that way. Most people, and this is true, almost every company has at one point had a third-party consultant or IT professional services firm involved in their support system. Whether it was valuable or invaluable is really kind of across the board. But that's usually how most people are addressing filling the gaps in their system. Obviously, contingency audit and expense reduction audits have been a huge part of this industry for quite some time and have provided a tremendous value over time to some organizations. People usually do that. So it doesn't solve a lot of the components of the telecom lifecycle, but certainly ensures that costing and bill errors are being monitored on an ongoing basis. And then as we see the market shifting, we believe that a SaaS-based TEM, TLM model that relies on distribution, and this is what Joe is talking about where VCOM's model differs slightly, but that we believe that there are multiple players coming into the space that are going to drive value in this solution. So from our viewpoint, the solution is a distribution-based model in the TEM TLM space that's going to give you a free or highly subsidized software platform to manage all of the things you need to in a TEM platform. The way to get all of the services for free is by aggregating the buying power of all the customers in the base. So if you take all of the mid-market companies, even on the call, and you put together the spend, you now have greater buying leverage across multiple carriers to be able to have access to all pieces of the board. Alongside that, because of the distributive model, meaning that the company is re-provisioning and reselling that service to the mid-market client, in a sense, there should be free or highly subsidized professional services that are added on to create value and visibility. We believe that imperative to the model is a carrier-agnostic sourcing and benchmarking play, so the ability to have clients drive what carrier they want to have and to be able to see those decisions, see those pieces of information and make their own decisions, and then centralizing all of the pieces around customer support in the operational component is what the distribution model should be good at, because you're allowed to then manage the carrier. You're allowing that company to manage the carriers on your behalf. And centralizing that allows reduction in FTEs, reduction in internal resource allocation, and increases the amount of kind of internal profitability or ROI you get from telco. So that's the model that we believe the market's going to, and we're really grateful to be able to have kind of introduced this idea, and this is how we believe the mid-market can get free software instead of having to pay for the barrier of entry. You're already spending on telco. Why wouldn't you use a distribution model to be able to access extra services? Joe?
Okay, so with that, I'm going to launch just a last poll, if I could. So those of you that have heard a little bit of this, and we'll open this up in just a little bit to question and answer and some other things, but if you're interested in learning more about this from our speakers, from VCOM Solutions, just select yes. If you're not interested, say no. If you're not interested right now, but you've got maybe some interest in the future, you can go ahead and select that second choice of yes, but hey, wait a month or so before you contact us. And I know that's sometimes popular because immediate contact isn't always best for you where you're at. So if you would just indicate your choice, and then we'll move through this. So I'm going to close this out in just a little bit. Just to have a little bit more. If you're not interested, again, just select no, yes, or yes, but please wait. Okay. And okay, and I'll go ahead and I'll share the contact information for our speakers as well, just if you're interested in contacting them directly. and VCOM solutions. And then if we could, what I'd like to do is open it up, just chat your questions in, any questions that you've got, and we'll try to respond to them as quickly as we can. And we do have some questions that have already been asked. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just buzz through some of these questions. So one of the questions that came up is, based on the model that you've explained, what you're really talking about is a situation where you manage the carriers on behalf of your customers, but at the same time, you're espousing the view that the carriers in turn subsidize or help reduce the cost of the solution by paying a commission. So how do you respond to people that say, isn't that kind of like the fox guarding the hen house, or some sort of conflict of interest where you've got, just if you would kind of respond to that approach
Sure.
of the.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'll take this. This is Joe Condi. We take a very care agnostic approach with our customers. We have relationships with over 30 plus national carriers, and we really go out to our customers and give them choice, right? They tell us which carriers they want to work with, which type of services they would like us to source on their behalf, and we often give them, at a minimum, 2 to 3 options, and sometimes even more. There's even cases where they say, I want Sprint and Quest, and I want Paul Bunyan Telecom, and we'll go out and get that a bid on behalf of that carrier where we don't have a relationship with them, and we'll still upload that service into the software. So it really comes down to just giving our customers choice and really taking a care agnostic approach.
Let me just quickly add, this is Roger, that I think along those lines that we believe that there will be a split in the distribution model, right? As more companies come to the forefront to do it, it'll be the split between companies that choose to have transparency and companies that are kind of keeping that behind the curtain. And that's for the enterprise to choose from what they want to rely on.
And Joe, if I can add to that, almost always when we're out talking to clients, we're going in and we're saving them money. So we're not subsidizing the software by charging them more. Because of our buying power with the carriers, we have significant leverage with them. So we're going in and there's a service that costs $500 a month. We're saying it's going to be $450 with us. So in no way are we actually subsidizing it by actually charging the customer more than what they're paying a day.
And how do you deal with billing errors? And related, I guess it's kind of related to this, that come up.
Sure. Sure. Well, we're actually shielding the customers from all the billing errors. We have hundreds of disputes that we're managing on behalf of the carriers that we're getting billed, but our customers are contracting with us. So we have one single billing platform. If we do make an error, which is very low, we probably get 2 to 3 disputes a month across our 500 customers. Those disputes are often handled in a matter of hours, if not a couple of days.
But what about the inherent potential conflicts of interest relating to billing errors? In other words, that carriers, paying you a commission, but at the same time you're pursuing a billing claim against them.
Well, the billing claim is, if we don't find the billing claim, then we get hurt, right? So when someone contracts with us for a service, say $500, if there's an error, normally the error is from the carrier, the underlying carrier, and we're the one getting hurt. We're still billing the customer $500, and we're getting charged maybe $550 for that service. So we're shielding the customer from that billing error.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. What about, this is a question that got chatted in, what about international? Here's one from a company that's based overseas, and they're wondering, does your solution, is it something that you could expand overseas? And in this case, it's actually a telecom expense management firm that's wondering, would you partner with them And, you know, how would it work? Would you partner
Sure.
with them? In this particular case, it's India, but, you know, maybe answer it both India as well as globally. Is this something that you would entertain?
Sure. We're looking to expand that footprint. Currently, um, we can only provide international service to the extent that our domestic carriers, our partnerships with U.S. carrier-based companies can provide service internationally. So in cases with India, we can provide some IP or private line service, for example, but really no local access in any international companies to date. And we manage so many different carriers, I can't really tell you what we could support, but it really comes down to what our current domestic carriers in terms of their ability to support international locations. But it is something that we're looking to expand.
Okay, and this is
And
another.
we actually hope it grows, and other companies abroad do distribution models as well, and can then service companies that are based internationally and only servicing different regions.
Great. And then here's another question. So this one's unrelated, though, to the others. But you talked a little bit about service order management and IT and asset management. So if somebody were to outsource their MACD, their move, add, change, their service order activity to you, how do they get visibility into the MACD activity once they've outsourced it to you?
Sure, Roger, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I think that one of the requirements of the model should be the ability to have visibility on those move, adds, and changes, and visibility on the carrier management component. So whatever portal is being provided, and the way we do it is manage the trouble tickets in a centralized system, interface with the carrier. The client gets visibility into that communication and that discussion and the back and forth of a particular trouble ticket. Now the advantage is you can manage, instead of sitting on hold with 5 carriers, you can manage those 5 carrier issues if you have an outage or a hiccup in an area or a move, add, and change. Then you can manage them in one single portal. But whoever is providing it in the distribution model should be providing visibility into that ongoing management, because most people won't want to let go of the control if they can't see the activity. And the requirement of the activity should be at a greater level than you're able to provide by yourself, right?
Hey, Joe, for us, it's inherent in our model, right? The same platform that our customers have visibility into their spend is the same platform that we use to provision our services with the underlying carrier. So if we're sourcing a service for you, it's being provisioned through our software, and then inherently you're getting visibility into that order, any billing ticket against that order, any trouble ticket or service ticket against that order, and all the inventory related to that certain ticket. So it's built into our model.
Great. Let me just see if there's any other questions. It doesn't look like there are. I don't see any. Let me just leave it to you then. Do you have any concluding thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience as we close out this webinar?
Yeah, Joe, I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to present today and encourage the audience to look at this model. We really believe that the distribution model in the TEM space is growing. There are more companies than just us providing this type of model, and so I would encourage you to explore it and get educated, and we're happy to take the time to meet with any of the attendees here and give them a demo of our platform.
Okay, great. So I've flashed up your contact information again on screen, and people that attended this will receive a PDF, so they'll get a hard copy of that. And then in addition to that, I'll just say as we close this out, on November 9th, we'll be doing a very focused webinar on healthcare and telecom expense management titled Finding the Right Prescription for Curing Chronic Costs. So join us for that. We'll be adding additional webinars as we come up with additional topics. In particular, we're looking to get into mobile device management topics as well as some other topics. And again, I want to say a big thank you to all of our member companies for helping underwrite these webinars. So again, thank you as well to Joe and Roger for doing a great job presenting on this topic, and thank you to all attendees for joining us today. Thank you. Bye now.